This lecture series, this is the 45th year, if I did my math correct. This is made possible by an endowment from the Burtenshaw family. Jerry and Angelina set this up in memory of their son, Brett. And what this is, Hospitality Week, is all made possible by them. And so they are not here today, but some of them may be watching down upon us. So maybe a little clapping to say thank you to them. It is my pleasure to introduce Charles Finkel, a visionary entrepreneur, designer, and pioneer whose work has helped shape the modern wine, beer, and spirits industry. Charles began his career founding Bon Vin, a wine importing company that championed small, family-owned wineries in Europe, while also introducing California boutique wines to a national audience. Through his work with St. Michel labels, he has helped bring Washington State wines to markets across the country. In 1974, Charles and his wife, Roseanne, moved to Washington to help build the now iconic Chateau St. Michel in Woodinville. Soon after that, they founded Merchant de Vin, introducing traditional family-owned European breweries, including some of the first Belgian beers available in the United States, helping spark the craft brewery movement as we know it today. In 1989, they founded the Pike Place Brewery in Seattle, later expanding it into the Pike Pub and Microbrewery Museum, creating a landmark that celebrates brewing heritage and innovation right there, just around the corner from the market. Today, Charles continues to write, design, travel, and explore the history of brewing, including his current book project, A Brief History of Beer in the Last 10,000 Years. On my way over to get his laptop, I learned more about beer, and I didn't even have one in my hand. So please join me in welcoming Charles Finkel.
I'm really impressed with your school, your curriculum, and the people that I've met. You certainly have going in the right direction, and it's all about hospitality. But it also is about business, and it's about management. So that's what I've attempted to concentrate on, hospitality, business, and management in the last 50-something years. I've been in the beverage business since 1965. So that's what? It's a long time. And I'm very honored and happy to be here at WSU. I would also like to introduce my girlfriend, Roseanne, and our dog, Sky, who are sitting here in the front row. And least you be confused, my wife that I'm going to refer to in the presentation was also named Rose Ann. So my Roseanne here is spelled R-O-S-A-N-N-E, and my wife Roseanne was R-O-S-E-A-N-N. So I differentiate by referring to Roseanne or Rose Ann. So, well, let's get to the chase. I guess I should talk about my background a little bit. It's a little different than you might have expected. If someone that specialized in wine and beer and food and hospitality, you might think would come from Cap d'Antibes or Saint Paul de Vence. I saw someone in the kitchen today with a T-shirt that said Saint Paul de Vence. That's where Picasso and Liget and all those people were from. But no, that's not true. So I'll tell you what is true. And then it's about my dad first. Was born in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. And that section of Europe, of Eastern Europe, is known as the Settlement of Pale. May I ask how many people here have heard of the Settlement of Pale? Only one. And it's significant, and it's particularly significant for Jewish people because the Settlement of Pale, which now encompasses what is now Ukraine, parts of Ukraine, of Poland, of Belarus, of Moldova, of Romania. It was a place that Jews could live, but people that weren't Jewish were not welcome. And it's a place that the Russian armies continue to have these horrible pogroms, they call them. How many of you have seen Fiddler on the Roof? You may know from having seen Fiddler on the Roof about these pogroms, and particularly the fact that the Russian army conscripted these young Jewish men and sent them off to war, in that case to fight the Germans, and in doing so, they conscripted them from life. So what my grandfather did is he got the hell out of Dodge. So between 1870 and around 1900, the census in the Ukraine revealed that, which is where Vinnytsia is, that Jews there operated 190,000 taverns, 89% of the distilleries, and 74% of the breweries in that country, which was part of the Russian Empire. When my dad was born, World War I was a year away. And as I said earlier, my grandfather faced the possibility of being conscripted, and that shows a little bit of what the towns looked like. They actually called the places that the Jews lived shtetls. And a shtetl was a place that was rural mostly and poor especially. So between 1.5 and 2 million Jews from this settlement of the Pale sought asylum in the U.S. between late 18th and early 19th century. They were shown a lot of hospitality in the new country, certainly by comparison to what they were shown in the old country. And many of them managed their businesses. They had acumen that led to success in the U.S. Added to the army anguish that my grandfather faced was an apparent arranged marriage gone south, a la Fiddler on the Roof. Grandpa, with my dad and my aunt on both arms, got out of Dodge. They sailed for New York, and likely because of some of their mashpuka, that's a Yiddish. The language that they spoke was Yiddish, a Yiddish word that means extended family. They made their way to the Bronx. The Bronx is one of the boroughs of New York, and it's famous because it was the borough that had the highest population of Jewish people of any in New York, which in general is known for that. And my maternal grandparents were from also the settlement of the Pale. They were from Poland and Bessarabia, which is now Moldova, and they left for the same reasons. They made it to the Bronx, and my mother, Sarah Wiener, was born in that borough. And according to family lore, my mother and my father met while working at the Tootsie Roll factory. So Tootsie Roll is the candy of my choice at home occasionally, very occasionally. 1933, my parents got married, and there were a lot of highs and there were some lows in that era. The highs were the Empire State Building, the tallest building in the world at the time was built. The low was that Adolf Hitler was appointed the German chancellor. It was also the height of the Great Depression, and jobs were scarce. National Prohibition, which lasted from 1920 until 1933, had just been repealed the year before. And it was because of the economy that Prohibition, in fact, was repealed. It's because women's right to vote in 1920 put Prohibition over the top, and then they found out by 1933 the top was too high and didn't work, so they repealed it and they elected Roosevelt as the president. So my dad, fortunately, was talented with all things electrical and mechanical, and he was drafted by American Airlines, which was founded in 1932, his work was considered essential. So unlike his dad, who faced conscription, he was exempt, and the airline moved him to Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1947. In 1941, The Lady Eve, featuring Henry Fonda as Charlie Pike, the ski onto the Pike Brewing fortune, won the Oscar for Best Comedy.
2 pints pale.
Now, wait a minute.
6 more Pikes pale. Make it snappy.
What are you trying to do, embarrass me? We're all out of pikes. Work them over on something else.
They don't want nothing else. They want the ale that won for Yale. Raw, raw, raw.
Well, tell them to go to Harvard.
Come on.
Now, how many times do I have to tell you?
4 Pikes pale.
Now, listen.
I thought you were in the beer business.
Beer, ale.
What's the difference?
Between beer and ale?
Yes.
My father'd burst a blood vessel if he heard you say that. There's a big difference. Ale's sort of fermented on the top or something, and beer's fermented on the bottom, or maybe it's the other way around. There's no similarity at all.
So I swear on a stack of Cabernet Sauvignon that I didn't know anything about this movie when I founded the Pike Brewing Company, whose first beer was pale ale. But it was here in Seattle at the Pike Place Market, not in New Haven, Connecticut. So we didn't win anything but the Super Bowl. So that comes to me. I was born in Flushing, Long Island, New York in 1943. And that was coincidentally the year of one of, if not the most famous photographs of World War II. And that was the last Jew in the title of the photograph, The Last Jew in Vinnytsia. So in this town, the settlement of the Pale, where my grandfather and my father immigrated from, 27,000 Jewish people were killed by the Nazis in one day. They dug their own grave, and that gentleman in the photograph over there was I don't know what he was doing, but it doesn't look nice. And they dug their own grave and they were buried. So it all goes to show you things have a way of happening. He was very fortunate, and I was very fortunate. Had it not been for my grandfather, I wouldn't have been able to make my way here today. So in 1947, my family moved to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, because American Airlines, where my dad worked, had their head maintenance base in Tulsa. So my dad found a home in Broken Arrow, about 20 miles from Tulsa. There were 3,000 people there, and we were the only Jewish family. Unlike that settlement of Pale and Vinnytsia, where everyone was pretty much Jewish. Roseanne told me that in the town of Belarus, where her family was from, 87% of the people in the town of Coburn, Belarus, were Jewish before the war. Now, if you go to Coburn, it's still there, Belarus, what percentage of the people are Jewish? Minimal. 1%, 0.5%, something like that. So when I would meet, we were the first people in Broken Arrow to have a television set. My parents brought it from New York. And when my friends would come to visit us, they'd say, well, what's that? I'd say, well, we didn't call it TV at that time. You know, you didn't need a abbreviation. That's a television. Oh, really? And if I turned it on, you could see a screensaver. I don't know if they called it that, but it was a Native American person, appropriate for Oklahoma, in black and white on the screen, just to show you that something happened. And it wasn't until 1952 that Tulsa got TV. And when I would meet a new friend in Broken Arrow, the first thing they'd say to me is, what church do you all go to? And I'd say, you know, I don't go to church, I'm Jewish. And they'd say, oh, really? Do you all believe in dancing? And to this day, that remains one of the most important ecclesiastical questions that I ponder. So I don't remember when I learned about the sunset law in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Have you all ever heard of those sunset laws? The sunset law was something that was passed during the Jim Crow era that prohibited black people from being in town after sundown. And it doesn't take a genius to recognize that if they couldn't be in town after sundown, they couldn't live there. So I grew up in a town that had no black people, and I later found out that the Nazis patterned their racial pogroms, I guess you would say, after this American model that was particularly popular in the southern part of the United States. But at least you think that I was discriminated against or faced anti-Semitism in spite of the fact that there were no black people in town. I wasn't. I was voted the most popular boy. I was voted, I'm not saying I was the best thespian, I'm only saying I was voted the best thespian. And I was lead in the senior play, and I was elected to Boy State. So my friends tell me that there were a lot of Ku Klux Klan members in town, but I was unaware of that. So although national prohibition, as I just mentioned, ended in 1932, and that's an important thing to consider for those people that are involved in the beverage business regarding alcohol, is that America has a different set of values when it comes to alcohol and marketing alcohol than many other parts of the world, because it was only in America that we prohibited this practice that people had been engaging in for about 10,000 years, having a drink before dinner or with dinner, and we passed this law that prohibited legal alcohol. And I want to emphasize that legal, because we certainly didn't prohibit illicit alcohol. And in fact, my first experience with buying alcoholic beverage was when my brother and his friend drove out on Mingo Road near Tulsa and bought a case of Scotch whiskey from a bootlegger. And I was 11 at the time, he was 16, and had I had the money, the bootlegger would have been just as delighted to sell it to an 11-year-old as he did to the 16-year-old. And regarding prohibition, Oklahoma didn't repeal it, not until I was a sophomore in high school. So our favorite son in Oklahoma, who was the most famous journalist, actor, humorist in America, Will Rogers, said that people in Oklahoma stumble to the polls to vote dry. And I might not go as far as our Oklahoma bard, but I do love people, and I feel that the vast majority are lovely despite the hatred and prejudice that I just illustrated and that we see and experience around us today and throughout history. And if I accomplish nothing more this afternoon, is to encourage all of you to fight that prejudice in every possible way that you can. And in the hospitality business, everyone is a customer. We don't care what their color is. We don't care what their religion is. We don't care whether they believe in dancing or not. We just wanted to treat them all equally, and that's the nice thing about hospitality. So, getting back to drinking, 3.2 beer was legal. So, in fact, you could drive a car down the street and drink 3.2 beer. Let's see, if you drink 3.2 beers, does that equate to 6.4% of alcohol? That's a question that I can't ponder. That gives you a little idea of what Broken Arrow looked like. That was a little earlier when they had dirt streets. Roseanne and I went to Oklahoma 2 years ago. The good news is that my high school honored me by awarding me with the Outstanding Graduate Award. The bad news is it took them 62 years to do it. But we went down that same main street on the back of a convertible waving to all the people that we didn't know, and they waved back as if they did know us, and it was really a nice experience. Well, in any event, my exposure to what Pliny the Elder called barley wine, we call beer, was at the local pool hall. And there you could get Progress. That is, to my knowledge, the only beer that was brewed in Oklahoma at the time. And Missouri-made Stag That was a really macho name. And the curiously named Griesedick. And as it turned out, Alvin Griesedick was my wholesale distributor in St. Louis when I started selling beer in the first place. And his family were related to the Bush family in St. Louis. So the difference between, this is a good example in value added, the difference in those beers that were local and those beers that were like Griesedick and Progress and Spag that cost a nickel, and those beers that were premium, so-called, Budweiser, Falstaff, Pabst, Schlitz, those beers cost a dime. Well, why did one cost a nickel and one cost a dime? There was no difference in the quality of the beer. None of them were that great. They were made instead of what the Germans called the Reinheitsgebot, Bavarian purity law of 1516. It says beer can only be made with water and malt and hops and yeast. Yeast, they didn't say yeast. They said God is good. They knew they liked what it did, but they didn't quite know what that was until Pasteur came along and identified yeast. And by contrast, these beers that I was exposed to and all Americans were exposed to at that time were made with about 50% corn syrup. And any of you who have studied food science know that corn syrup has no nutritional value. In fact, it has the negative nutritional value. And it doesn't have any taste. So aside from not having any nutritional value and no taste, it was great beer. So the one that I liked was the coldest one. So there were no supermarkets in our hometown, and we lived what might be called a locavore diet. My dad would grow his own vegetables. I helped him in the garden. I went to the farm where we bought our eggs. I had a crush on the candler. You all know what a candler is? They hold each egg in front of a candle to see if there's something in the egg that you don't want to eat. And we bought our sides of beef from a farm also where it's the smokehouse, just to this day, leaves such a positive feeling in my memory. And my mom loved to cook. She was a great cook. And one of the fun things that I did is every month, I was invited to join my mom and other women in the community at the Home Demonstration Club. And that's where these mostly farm women would demonstrate how good their cornbread, how good their collard greens, how good their chocolate meringue pie was. And I was the recipient of all those things with great pleasure. So I am an artist by proclivity. And my first job was painting the text of my friends' girlfriends' names on the back of their car. And somewhere I have a photograph of one of my friends' cars with Pat's crossed out and Mary Lou put in. I must have done that myself. So I was a pretty good student, but I excelled especially in art. And the best grade I ever got was in college, where I majored in design and marketing. I got an A+ for designing letter form. In high school, the most important course I ever took, although I didn't realize it until years later when I learned how to use a computer, was typing. I also loved and continue to love serious music, and dance, and photography, and painting, and all of those things. This is a painting I did at age 12. You all know who that is. That's Alfred E. Newman. And he's the Mad Magazine gentleman. And his famous saying is, "What? Me worry?" So in 1962, I graduated high school and I was off to college. And my girlfriend at the time, uncle, he was a bon vivant bachelor uncle, he got me a case of wine. And I still remember to this day, there's Wente Brothers Gray Riesling, which is not really Riesling, but a pretty good wine, and Louis Martini Cabernet Sauvignon, and Chilean Riesling and Burgundy. And oh my goodness, I was so fascinated by the selection of wines. And it wasn't just the wines themselves, it was the way they were packaged. I grew up in a rural community where no one branded anything. If you grew cotton, if you grew alfalfa, if you grew tomatoes and radishes, normally you either sold them directly to the consumer or, in the case of cotton, sold to a cooperative that in turn sold them to someone else. But Farmer Jones' name was never on them. So when I saw these wines and I saw Wente Brothers, Livermore, California, oh my goodness, what a great thing. Talk about terroir. Terroir has since become a popular thing for people to talk about, but no one knew that word. It's the French word for soil. But in fact, it refers to a broad category of environmental circumstances that determine the taste of a particular wine, or it could be a beer, or it could be a chicken, like poulet de braise in France. The French came out with the words appellation contrôlée to describe in a legal form that you couldn't make a Chateauneuf de Pape up in Alsace. It had to be in Rome, in the Rhone area, around the town of Chateauneuf de Pape. So on an ROTC trip, I made it out to California at that time, and I visited a bunch of the same wineries that my girlfriend's uncle, which, by the way, I fell in love with the wines, but not the niece. So between my junior and senior year in college, that's me, I toured Europe with a friend. We drank ales in English pubs, wild beers in Belgian bistros, Weiss beer in Bavarian beer gardens. We drank wine, of course, in Italy and in France. It was one of those trips, it's Tuesday afternoon, it must be Belgium. That we traveled so much. My friend wasn't so keen to go to museums, which I am, but that's another story. So my senior year in college, I lucked out. I got a job in my field, alcoholic beverages. I got a job selling, primarily at that case, since repeal had only been repealed in 1959, the idea of going into a liquor store and buying a bottle of anything was anathema to the whole way the society worked. But I got this job and I excelled. I doubled the wine sales. And why did I do that? And I think it has a relationship with why each of you are here, to educate yourself, to learn more so that you can do a better job at what you're doing. So in my case, I learned about wine. I read every book I could get my hands on, and there are quite a few books about wine, mostly not written by the French or the Italians, even though I probably couldn't have read those. I have a few of those, but by English people. And certain wines, because you may know that Henry VIII married Eleanor of Aquitaine and acquired Bordeaux and that part of France, which is a very famous wine growing area. So those wines are almost as much English as they are French. And the same with port. They call port the Englishman's wine because of the political relationship the English had with the wines of Portugal. So I excelled so readily in this liquor store that my main wholesaler said, Charles, you've got a potential career in the wine business. I would like to introduce you to wholesale distributors or importers in New York, which is where the center of the wine trade occurred, and I think you could go far. And New York was pretty far, and that was a joke. And so I did, and the first place that I went was 21 Brands. They were the agents for Ballantine Scotch. At that time, no one cared much about wine, really. I did, but in general, in 1960, that was 66, America drank 80% of the wines we drank were fortified wines. You all know what those are, right? Wines that have brandy added to them to make them stronger. So an example would be port, sherry, muscatel, Tokay, pink white port. I don't know where that one came from, but that was a real wine. In fact, it's one that I sold when I moved to Washington State. And it wasn't until the 1970s, which I participated in, that Americans, hopefully helped a lot by Boeing. Boeing had these jumbo jets that took large numbers of people to Europe, and it was de rigueur for a college student during the 1970s to go to Europe and experience a different lifestyle, where you'd sit down at a meal, and instead of drinking a wine because it had a high volume of alcohol, you drank a wine because it tasted good, and it was such a nice compliment to the food that you're drinking, the food that you're eating. I went to New York, and I went to work for this company called Monsieur Henri Wines Limited, and a company that I started to say about 21 brands. So I went to 21 brands, that Valentine importer, and I was interviewed in this trophy room. Both Jack and Charlie, that owned the famous 21 Club in New York, not far from the Museum of Modern Art, were big game hunters. And I might have shot a rabbit or two, but I'm remorseful about it to this day. So the idea of going to a place where you have lions and tigers and elephants and everything else, so it was at a table made of an elephant's penis on a zebra skin rug that I was interviewed. And they told me about their spirits, but what about your wines? Well, they didn't have many wines. So I went to a couple of other companies, and one was Seagram's, one was Chenley, same thing. The dog was the spirits, and the tail was the wine. They had it for whatever reason, but they didn't sell much of it. Maybe the exception would have been a little champagne. Champagne was famous, and people did drink that. So my company sent me to Houston, but before they did that, they sent me to Europe. My wife, Roseanne, who I show here, they sent me to Europe, and I visited there all of the wineries, maybe not all, but most of the wineries they represented in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, in Spain, and it was a real eye-opening experience. And my boss, his name is Frank Feinberg, and he remains to this day one of the role models that I consider important in my life. He was a real bon vivant, and they were in the business of selling the best wines in the world, from estates in Burgundy and Bordeaux, for example, to the best restaurants in New York, which was no small task. So they were brave. They hired a guy with an Oklahoma accent to sell Polygny Montrachet, Chateauneuf-du-Pape, and Gewürztraminer to restaurants in New York. And in doing that, I won Best Salesman of the Year, and I won a trip to Spain to visit more wineries. And they sent me then to Houston, which was a hot market for wine. It was the oil capital of the world, and a lot of people were moving from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt at the time. So in Houston, I conducted a wine tasting, and I gave Roseanne plenty of notice, I thought. I called her one afternoon, and I said, "Tonight, would you like to go to a wine tasting?" It was a blind date. So fortunately, she said yes, and afterwards we drank Shiner beer and till the wee hours of the morning. And I looked into her beautiful eyes, and I thought to myself, the quote that Otto von Bismarck said, "Show me a woman that loves beer, and I'll conquer the world." Well, we were engaged a month later, and I knew that she loved me because she was willing to change her name from Roseanne Martin to Roseanne Finkel. And there we are, and our daughter got married, and we went to the wedding venue, which was in Paulsbo, and this magazine was on the counter in the wedding venue, and it was this thing called Bride and Groom magazine, and there we are many years later. So, yeah, this goes back. I did these slides late at night, so they may not be in a total sequence. So Monsieur Henri was the company I was talking about. They were in Williamsburg. They were called Monsieur Henri because the owner's father was Harry Feinberg. And there's no French word for the name Harry. So instead of Harry, they called it Monsieur Henri. It sounded very, very French. It was on a trip to California that I noticed a case stacking of Saint Michel American wine. Well, you may find that curious that it would be American wine and rather than Washington State wine. Of course, it was Washington State wine, but I knew about it because I had served my country as a self-appointed title sign painter first class at Fort Lewis, and that is to say, I spent all my time in the military using my artistic skills to paint eagles. And I knew there were a few table wines in Washington, but the most famous one was this one, Nuico. Any of you heard of Nuico wine? That means National Wine Company, and it was part of the largest producer of wine in Washington State, American Wine Growers. So you could go to any grocery store in the state, and Washington State wines, by the way, were the only ones that could be sold in a grocery store. Those darn foreign wines, like those from Oregon, California, Idaho, they couldn't be sold in a state, in a supermarket in Washington State. To get those wines, you had to go to the state liquor store where the guy would say, "What do you want?" And you say, "I'd like number 47, please." They'd grumble and hand that to you. By the time I founded my first company, it was Bon Vin. It was based on what I observed at Monsieur Henri. Washington State had started growing vinifera table wines. How many people here know what vinifera is? Vinifera, that's an important thing to know. Vinifera is the European grape type. Cabernet Sauvignon, Sangiovese, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, versus Vitis Lambrusca. That is what was grown in Washington State under Nuico. And Vitis Lambrusca is Ives, Catawba, Delaware, and mostly Concord grapes. Those are American grape varieties, and the characteristic that they have is that I enjoyed doing those smells that several of us were doing earlier. Well, the one smell I didn't see in there was the foxhole smell. What the smell might be if you found yourself in a foxhole, and it's kind of a musty, very unpleasant smell. The way to counter such a smell, I later learned when I became part of the winery, was add sugar. And that works for almost anything you're making. If you add enough sugar, it's likely to taste okay. And so that's why, getting back to my Jewishness, that's why Mogen David and Manischewitz wines, which are Concord wines, are tolerable at Passover Seders, is because they have huge volumes of sugar in them. So, in any event, I was selling imported wines that I had imported from Europe, and I went to this retailer in California. His name is Daryl Cordy, and he and I are still friends to this day, and it's more than 50 years later. And I saw a case stacking of these Saint Michel American wines on the floor, and you see the label, and I saw the label in that. What is that room we were just in where yeah, I saw a bottle of Saint Michel, which is their 55th or something anniversary bottle. It's the same label as we had here, and this one says Cabernet Sauvignon. The first vintage of Saint Michel, by the way, was 67, but American wine growers had been around since repeal, 1933. And so I asked him what he thought, and he said, "Well, the only way I can tell you about these wines is if we open them and you taste them." So he did, and I did, and oh my goodness, they were delicious. I was taken aback. They were nothing like the Washington State wines I had before, but my big question is, why do you call them Washington State? So he gave me the name of the manager of the winery in Seattle. Winery was in a really romantic location. Kenworth Truck was on one side, and Boeing Development was on the other. And I called the gentleman at the winery and I said, my name is Charles Finkel and I sell wines nationally and I would like to be the agent for your Saint Michel wines, but why do you call them American? He says, people in Washington State have a very bad opinion about Washington State. Well, no wonder. It was the only one they could buy at the grocery store, and it was made with this Lambrusco grape variety, not vinifera varieties. And ultimately, I was able to change that. I'm responsible for changing the appellation of the first Saint Michel wines from American to Washington State. And so he appointed me the exclusive agent for the United States, he and his owners, for Saint Michel wines. Not for Noeco, not for Pomerel. That Pomerel was a competitor. So if you go to that same supermarket I talked about earlier, you'd see Noeco over on here, and you see Pomerel over here, and they were competing with one another. The person that was shopping in the store would say, which one do I want today? Do I want a Pomerel white port, or they also had Burgundy. Pomerel Burgundy or Noeco Burgundy. They were more or less the same price, but I found out later they were the exact same wine. All they did was change the label at the winery, and you got either Noeco or Pomerel. So when I was in California selling wines, I couldn't afford to fly home to Houston where Rose Ann lived, so I spent my time going up to the Napa Valley, Sonoma County. I fortunately had a wealthy friend that lived in Sausalito. He was in the oil business. He was gone all the time. So I was able to stay in his apartment on the water in Sausalito. And I did this at a time that was pivotal and lucky for me. And that is to say that contrary to today, you may be aware that the biggest tourist attraction next to Disneyland in California is what? The wine tours. And we experienced the same thing in Washington State, maybe not quite to that extent. So at that time, the first new winery, 1969, Robert Mondavi Winery in the Napa Valley became the first wine that was a new winery in Napa Valley since Prohibition, pre-Prohibition, 1920. So it's hard to imagine today that that is the case, but it was. So in 1969, Gallo threatened to boycott Washington wines, or have them boycotted in California, unless Washington State relaxed these restrictions on having only Washington wines sold in the supermarket. And they did that. So in 1974, I sold my company to the same company that bought American Wine Growers, the Noeco folks, and they hired me, and I came out, and I designed this building that you see in front of me here. We had an architect, but he had never been to France, and I'd been to France repeatedly. So that's my design, and my office was the one over to the right here. And so I'm responsible for the touring and tasting, the gates, the stained glass windows in the tasting room. A lot of the stuff they still have there today. And it was a lot of fun, and it's fun to go back this many years later. So in 1974, we moved to Seattle with our Roseanne, myself, and our son. Our daughter was born here, and they were the ones that U.S. Tobacco had the idea to build a chateau in Woodinville. And I worked with that gentleman that you see in the photograph. His name is Andrei Chelychev, or was Andrei Chelychev. He was the most famous winemaker in America. And it was a great honor to be with him. But one thing that he taught me is humility. Here's a guy that's the most famous winemaker in America. But if I said, Andre, I think we need more press wine to give the wine more color, he would listen to my suggestion, and quite often he would accept it. And that humility is something that I've observed with people that are successful. They don't think they're better than someone else. And I think that's an important message to hear. This is a book that Saint Michel did for their first 50 years, and that's Roseanne and me with a bottle of Saint Michel. So in 1978, I left the winery and I founded a company called Merchant de Vin. And they were in Seattle, but we sold throughout the United States. And we met this gentleman called Michael Jackson. I met him because he wrote the book, The World Guide to Beer, which is the greatest book ever written about beer. And so I started representing these breweries. The main reason I did it is I love beer. You know, people say, well, are you a wine drinker or are you a beer drinker? My answer is yes. So these are the best, among the best breweries in the world. I was fishing for my barrel when I went to get the agencies for these, and I ended up becoming their designer. So all of these labels that you see here for some of the most famous breweries are my designs. This is one oatmeal stout from Samuel Smith. I went to the brewery in Yorkshire, the oldest brewery in Yorkshire, founded in 1758. I said, I'd like to have an oatmeal stout. I love that name. I love the style. And not the style, but the name. It sounded so wholesome. And he said, what's an oatmeal stout? So here's some guy from Oklahoma going to the oldest brewery in Yorkshire and asking them to make an oatmeal stout. But I did, and it's become their most popular beer. So Jackson also wrote the English Pub, the World Guide to Beer. And one great experience I had was going to one of Samuel Smith's pubs in London, the famous Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese on Fleet Street, where all the writers gathered, including Samuel Johnson, that wrote the dictionary, and having him talk about the history of pubs in England. He had written the book. So I became the agent for Samuel Smith. This is an ad that I created for them. That shows you a little bit about them. They have the largest team of gray Shire horses in the world. They have their own cooperage. And this is the Cheshire Cheese, the one next door. So one day I received a call from Peter Maxwell Stewart. He's the 21st Laird of Turquoise, and he inherited from his rich uncle the oldest inhabited house in Scotland. So he'd heard from Michael Jackson that I was the best beer importer of the country. He said, are you interested in representing Turquoise in the United States? I thought to myself, is Mary Queen of Scots Catholic? The answer is yes. Then over in Bavaria, I met the people that owned the Eyinger Brewery, the Inselkammer family. And they are my absolute role models for hospitality. Most of these breweries that I represented in Europe, including Turquoise, including Samuel Smith, and including Eying, are hotels as well as breweries and restaurants. So we became great friends, and this is an example. I spoke once at Oktoberfest, and this is a newspaper ad that appeared in the local Munich newspaper. You can see to the right. Welcome, Charles Finkel. So I woke up one morning, and there I was in the newspaper. Pincus Müller in Münster. They said if you haven't been to Pincus, you haven't been to Münster. Lindemans in Belgium. Orval, I'm the only Jewish person that will speak to you this afternoon, I'm sure, that represented a Catholic monastery that brewed beer. Then as part of what I was doing, I saw the movement of craft breweries, so I started the Pike Brewing Company. And Franz Inselkammer, the Bräu von Eying from the Eyinger Brewery, tapped our first keg. We started Pike Place Brewery. We started the Pike Microbrewery Museum, the Pike Pub. That's our employees in 2018. We had about 100 employees. When I started, there were 2 craft breweries in America, 1978. There are now over 10,000 craft breweries. That's Michael Jackson, who was buried in a tie. This tie I designed. This is the long version of that. I worked on various books. Those are some more labels I designed. I was the art editor of the Oxford Companion to Beer. And I want to finish by saying I'm indebted to Roseanne, my wife and partner for 52 years. She was my muse and inspiration. She was loved by everyone that knew her. And to say that we had a wonderful life together is an understatement. Roseanne, by the way, was good friends with Roseanne. And Roseanne and I are the only two people that are on the both National Craft Beer Hall of Fame and the Washington State Craft Beer Hall of Fame. So I thank you very much. I did fall in love with the beverage industry or hospitality, really. I love restaurants. I love hotels. I love great food. And with Monsieur Henri, the company I worked for, they sent me to Europe. We stayed at the palace, the Crillon Palace in Paris. We ate in Tour d'Argent and Grand Fefort and some of these great three-star Guide Michelin restaurants. We drank the great Le Montrachet, which Dumas said you should drink kneeling and with your head bared. We drank Chambertin, which was Napoleon's favorite wine. And we visited Lafite and Latour and Aubryon and Margaux and Chateau de Kim. So it wasn't hard to extrapolate from that. I think I'm in the right business. And in fact, I have been in the right business because I've loved almost every minute of it. And I highly recommend for any of you, even though we heard at lunch today that there's a soft spot for people about the alcoholic beverage business in America right now, not only in America, the whole world for a number of reasons. People have been drinking for about 10,000 years. And I don't advocate in any way overconsumption of alcohol. I advocate drinking alcohol for the pleasure it brings you to taste, not to drink too much of it. That's a mistaken impression that Americans have because we grew up during Prohibition. We were all taught this is evil, demon rum. But I found that not to be the case. And I also found that people that I've worked with, these vintners, these brewers, were lovely people that were very proud of what they did. And many of them, all those people that I showed you photographs from Europe, they're multi-generational producers of whatever they're producing, whether it's beer, wine, or hospitality. Any other questions?
What would you tell somebody who's trying to get into that industry? And also, what's your favorite beer you've ever had?
The question is, what do you tell people that want to get into that industry? And I would tell them that it's easier to do what I'm going to tell you now than it was when I did it. Because you had to go to a specialty bookstore in New York to find a book about the wines of Alsace. You had to really research it. Now all you have to do is go online, and all the information is there. So number 1, 2, and 3, can I give you that? Learn, learn, learn. That's the secret. You be an expert in your field, and you'll be successful, I believe. Yes, please.
So you said in the beginning that management is an important part of hospitality. So what traits do you think make some of the best managers that you've ever worked with or hired?
That's a good question, and I'm happy to answer it. In my case, it's that what I mentioned, love of people. If you love people and you like to be around them and you want to see them happy, they'll become great employees. And one of the things happened to me repeatedly when I had the Pike Pub and the Pike Place Market in Seattle. People would come up to me and they said, I can tell by your employees that they love working here. So if a employee loves working there, is he going to do a bad job or is he going to do a good job? Good job. So management has very, very broad implications, obviously. But for me, managing people, treating them as you would want to have them treat you, and treating them humbly. So I'm no better than the dishwasher that washes the dishes in our restaurant kitchen. I'm on equal footing with them. I like them. I want them to succeed. I want them to become a busser. And I want the busser to become a server. And I want the server to become the president of the company.
All right, well, with that managerial advice, I think this is where we clapped. Charles and Roseanne, I don't know the dog's name, Sky. Thank you for making the trek across the state. Thank you for telling your story. I think I learned a lot, history, beer, wine, little bit of booze. So thank you. I look forward to having dinner with you this evening. All of you that came, I appreciate you. Thank you for choosing to be here. We are grateful for your presence, and go Cougs.